Thank you. So on behalf of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Audubon, Vermont, and Hysted, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. We have a great program lined up for you. And my name is Sarah Barker, and I'm the director of the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And through this national program, we work to advance the pace and impact of land trust protection and stewardship efforts through birds. So I am joined today by two co-hosts, Katie Blake, who is a conservationist with Hysted and supports the work of the Regional Conservation Partnership in the Northeast, and Steve Hagenbu, conservation biologist and forester at Audubon, Vermont, who will be running this webinar and who I'll be turning it over to in just a few minutes. So this webinar, Technical and Financial Assistance for RCPs, Conservation Partners and Landowners, is the final webinar in our four-part series and has a great lineup of speakers for you today. So in this webinar, we will hear from representatives of Maine and Mass Audubon, as well as Audubon New York, Vermont, Connecticut, and Mid-Atlantic about the various services and learning opportunities they provide to help landowners understand where to begin when managing their forest with birds in mind and how to make the process financially viable. So this webinar builds on the session from September 29th, and this is the bird-friendly forestry practices and strategies for landowners. And that session explored specific forest management activities and silvicultural options designed to enhance bird habitat while also achieving timber and non-timber forest products, climate adaptation and mitigation, and other ecosystem service goals. So, and just as a reminder, all these webinars are being recorded and will be posted on the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative website to serve as future reference materials. We will also post the link to the recordings of the first three webinars in the chat shortly for those who may have missed it. And continuing forestry education credits are available for this webinar. We will provide a link to a Google attendance sheet in the chat at the very end of the webinar. So to receive the credits, please sign the Google Doc upon completion of the presentation. So next slide, please. So this webinar series is brought to you by the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, and it's represented here by this incredibly diverse suite of participating partners. The initiative is a collaborative effort between the regional conservation partnerships, their partners, Audubon groups, Hysted, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And the goal of the initiative is to help RCPs connect with bird conservation in ways that advance and expand their efforts, their partnerships, and also their ecological priorities. So this group also aims to raise awareness and collective knowledge about the importance of bird conservation and the role RCPs and landowners can play in protecting and restoring habitats for declining populations. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology supports the initiative by serving as a co-leading organization with Hysted, and thus I am a co-lead along with my partner, and as I mentioned, co-host today, Katie Blake. So the initiative received a grant that has allowed us to put on this webinar series specifically geared toward RCP and land trust leaders in order to bring you the tools that you need for your conservation and management practices. Next slide, please. So I'd like to now turn it over to our program host, Steve Hagenbu, who will introduce the session as well as our panel of speakers. So Steve has worked with Audubon in a variety of roles since 1998. And currently he's a senior conservation biologist and forester with Audubon Vermont's Healthy Forest Initiative. And in this position, Steve works with private landowners, municipalities, foresters, and land managers, as well as other conservation partners to promote management activities that will enhance the health and habitat value of forest land for priority bird species. And he played a key role in developing the national award-winning Foresters for the Birds program, and more recently, BirdFriendly Maple. And in 2019, Steve obtained his master's degree in conservation biology from Antioch University in New England. His graduate research investigated the implications of maple sugarbush management for neotropical migrant songbirds. And when not in the woods on business, Steve can be found there hiking and mountain biking, backcountry skiing, exploring with his kids, or whatever else seems like fun at the time. And Steve and his wife, Dana, and their 2 children live in Waterbury Center, Vermont, where they run a small farm business. So take it away, Steve.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us here today for what is the 4th in our 4-part webinar series on managing our forest here within the RCP network with birds in mind. Welcome back if you've been with us before, and a special welcome if this is your first time being with us here today. I want to also extend a special welcome, a special thank you, to HiStead, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, for giving me the opportunity to share with all of you throughout the Northeast these principles and concepts that are so important to thinking about how we can manage and steward our forests in ways that support birds, but also realize all of the other important goods and services that our forests give us, including right now, which you'll see in the background behind me, certainly here in northern New England at least, our forests are in full display, not with the colors of breeding songbirds anymore, but with the incredible foliage that we provide and that the world comes to see here. So just yet another important role that our forests play and things that we benefit from it. But today we're going to really be kind of diving into a culmination of the kind of pulling together the 3 previous webinars. They were designed in some ways to work in succession. And so just to kind of give a quick overview, if you were not able to join us before, or if you were here, just as a review, webinars number 1, we really looked at how birds can be motivators and ambassadors for encouraging excellent forest stewardship on the ground. And we heard that specifically from Annette Goyne, who is a private forest landowner that's involved in the Cold Hollow to Canada Regional Conservation Partnership, and what the experiences that her and her husband, Jeff, how birds have really helped them in thinking about how they steward their land. Then we were joined by Dan Kilborn from the Vermont Land Trust in week 2, when we talked about habitat requirements and specific considerations that we can make for bringing northeastern forest birds into our forest management. And Dan shared some specific examples of ways that he has been doing that on land that the Vermont Land Trust owns in fee. And then 2 weeks ago, during our 3rd webinar, we dove into a little more of the technical aspects of specific forest management strategies and practices, so cultural options that can be used to integrate bird habitat into overall forest stewardship. And Nancy Patch, who is a county forester with the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, was our special guest that week, and really did big part of that presentation in sharing ways that we can, again, integrate silvicultural treatments with bird habitat. So today, now that we've got all this kind of background and conceptual ideas about managing our forests with birds in mind, what we want to be able to do is provide with all of you and the networks that you're a part of, landowners that you may work with, understanding what those opportunities are within your own individual states to get some specific assistance, both in a technical capacity, but also perhaps in some financial ability to make sure that these programs can be realized on the ground where you happen to be. So I'm really excited to have the kind of the suite of presenters that are here with us today. You know, it's regional conservation partnerships, and we're seeing that we have these regional bird conservation efforts, which, if you remember, if you were here with us in presentation number 1, we talked a lot about the importance of the entire East Coast, the Atlantic Flyway, because what we think of as our birds that are here in the summer months, right now, they're most of those species, the migratory ones anyway, are not with us. They're in other parts of the world. They're on their way, or in Central America, Mexico, South America. And so when we think about conservation, we really need to think about it in a much larger context than our own states that we happen to be in. And that's what we want to present to you today, is what those opportunities are here, really within the Northeast region, where we have forest bird conservation programs that are happening on the ground. So we're going to hear in order today from Suzanne Traeger at Audubon, Audubon, New York, Corey Folsom O'Keefe at Audubon, Connecticut, Scott Parkhill from Audubon MidAtlantic, Jeff Ritterson from Mass Audubon, and Sally Stockwell at Maine Audubon. And these are state programs. You'll see from our map here, both New Hampshire and Rhode Island do not have a representative today. We're presenting to you on programs that are have on the ground initiatives right now, but also knowing that some of the other states, New Hampshire has some things in the works that we're aware of, and are doing some good forest management on their own sanctuaries that they take care of. And Rhode Island also has some efforts that I'll share briefly at the end of my presentation about the things that they're doing there too. But we have a full slate of things to go through here today. Lots of exciting initiatives happening out there. So we're going to dive right into it. And we're going to start off with Suzanne Traeger.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm Suzanne Traeger. I'm the Forest Program Manager for Audubon, New York. And I'll be talking to you today really quickly, but I'll try to cram it all in about resources, programs, funding opportunities for forest bird habitat conservation work in New York specifically. I do want to start out by acknowledging that Audubon, Connecticut, and New York are newly merged regional state programs of National Audubon, so that's exciting. And as Steve already mentioned, Corey Folsom O'Keefe will be presenting right after me to discuss program opportunities in Connecticut. So, okay, let's get into it. Next slide, please. So I see that Steve and others have already provided a lot on the science behind our forest bird conservation work at Audubon and beyond. So I'm going to keep my slides focused to how we get habitat on the ground in New York and really focusing on key audiences that are critical to getting that work done. And one of which, as you know, are landowners. And similar to other states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions, the majority of New York's forests are privately owned. So that's why private landowners are so important to work with. Audubon conducts a lot of outreach and education to landowners and the general public too. We have great communications network. We have a number of newsletters and websites, social media platforms, webinar series, and then we have our centers and chapter programs that really enable us a huge reach. And then more specific to our forest work, we reach landowners directly through our conservation projects and programs and through our many conservation partners too. Next slide, please. So before we jump into conservation partners and projects, I want to take a deeper dive into how Audubon is engaging forest landowners. And again, we do that through outreach and education, but also technical assistance too. So we help landowners identify what they can do on their land to create or improve habitat for birds and provide or connect them with the information and resources they need to do that management. So we provide educational materials and resources, and then we also work directly with landowners on their property through site visits where we assess their habitat, or through programming where we tour examples of habitat management, like in the photo on the right-hand side of the slide. So many times we end up connecting those landowners with professional foresters, and I want to discuss that on the next slide. But on this slide, you'll see just a few of the educational materials we provide forest owners. The first is a forest resource center that's on our website, and that's newyork.audubon.org. But there's also a link on the slide here that'll take you directly to that forest resource center. So there's also a questionnaire on there for landowners to fill out. And once they fill that out, we can then direct them to either the right materials that we have on our website. Sometimes they have specific questions that we can answer, or sometimes we can actually schedule a site visit for them if they fall within a certain geography that we've prioritized for forest bird habitat conservation. And then also on the slide is a picture of our landowner's guide to managing forests for birds. And you can check that out by scanning the QR code on the slide with the camera on your phone, or it's also available right in our Forest Resource Center too on our website. So just follow that link and you'll see that the guide there in a PDF form. And then similar to other Audubon programs, this guide is a synthesis of the scientific literature about the habitat needs of forest birds and also how they respond to forest management. So it provides guidance to manage forests to benefit a full suite of forest birds. Next slide, please. So another really important audience to engage in forest bird conservation are foresters and other land managers. recognizing the importance of collaborating with them to integrate bird habitat considerations into forest management planning and implementation. We've created educational materials for foresters too. They have more technical content. And then we also offer various trainings and other programs to foresters and other land managers. There's a picture of our Forester's Guide to Forest Management for Birds with another QR code for you to scan if you'd like to take a look at it on your phones. We also have that available as a PDF on our Forest Resource Center, following the link on the previous slide. So a new program that Audubon is piloting is an Audubon Forester Endorsement Program. And we're delivering a series of virtual trainings similar to what you're participating in here. And there's also a few follow-up steps for foresters to demonstrate that they're proficient in integrating forest bird habitat considerations into their management planning. Once those steps are completed, for the forester will then receive an Audubon endorsement. So we're piloting this new endorsement program in Vermont, New York, and Connecticut right now. We hope to expand that into other states really soon. And we're actually currently in the middle of a second round of training webinars. So we've been planning this new conservation initiative for some time now, for a few years, and really just to strengthen our collaboration with foresters, and then also to connect the landowners that we engage with the Audubon endorsed foresters too. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to shift now into how we get quality habitat on the ground and what are the programs that help remove especially some of the financial barriers to implementing forest habitat management, because it does cost money to do things like control invasives, to cut trees that may not have financial value. So there are a number of incentive programs available in New York, listed on the slide here, and some of these are available in other states too. These are programs that can help pay for forest habitat management. So specific to New York, right at the top here is a brand new program called Regenerate New York. It's a cost share program implemented by New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And this helps landowners implement forest management that improves forest regeneration in particular, but many of the eligible practices are great for improving bird habitat. So that includes things like controlling invasive species, putting up deer exposures, putting up slash walls to prevent deer browse, doing patch cuts, canopy openings, things like that. It's a new program. It just opened up in May. And it's a first come, first served cost share opportunity where landowners do need to work with a professional forester to write their management prescriptions. There's also the NRCS, that's the Natural Resources Conservation Service, EQIP program, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And that's a financial assistance program, again, that also helps landowners pay for quality forest habitat management. Many of you are probably familiar with EQIP or other NRCS or Farm Service Agency programs that operate in a similar way, a similar cost share structure. EQIP can provide financial assistance for things like timber stand improvements, which can improve mature forest habitat for birds like wood thrush. They can also cover things like patch cuts or clear cuts to benefit birds like American woodcock or chestnut-sided warblers. And again, it can also help fund things like invasives control, deer fencing, and much more. Working Lands for Wildlife is another NRCS program that provides financial assistance to improve habitat for certain species of greatest conservation need. So that would be bog turtles, New England cottontail, and actually this year, golden wing warbler habitat management is also eligible in New York. And then finally, the state forest tax law program can also offer incentives to forest landowners too. Most importantly, it helps keep forests as forests and keep your land affordable by providing property tax reductions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so you'll hear a little bit more about this program probably from Steve when he covers Vermont, but I mentioned earlier that Audubon has conservation projects where we are actively reaching and engaging landowners in forest bird habitat conservation and management. And so I want to touch on just a few. And the first here is our Woods, Wildlife, and Warblers program. This started in Southern Vermont in 2016, and it's expanded throughout the entire Lake Champlain Basin in Vermont and New York. And then it also covers the Upper Hudson watershed in New York State. So you can take a look at that map there to get a sense of our geographic coverage. We have so many partners we work on this project with. New York and Vermont Tree Farm Programs, Vermont Woodlands Association, the New York Forest Owners Association, American Forest Foundation, and many more. We leverage these important partnerships to provide landowners with knowledge and resources they need to improve their forests for wildlife and birds like wood thrush, American woodcock, and golden-winged warbler. And this program also includes Audubon's BirdFriendly Maple project. Next slide, please. Which is the next program I'd like to share, and Steve will probably be talking about this one too. This is a program developed by Steve Hagenbu at Audubon Vermont and all their partners. It's been a huge success. They have more than 40 participating maple producers, and we're piloting a BirdFriendly Maple program in New York. We hope to launch this program fully statewide in New York really soon, hopefully this year or early next year. And BirdFriendly Maple is a market-based strategy to encourage forest bird habitat management, where qualifying maple producers can receive marketing materials, including labels. And we have a couple examples of stickers used in Vermont and our sticker used in New York on the slide here. And other materials, educational materials like this brochure on the right-hand side that producers can use to sell their maple products. So to qualify, a sugar bush must have some level of structural and tree species diversity. And we have specific assessments we conduct and requirements that need to be met to qualify for the program. And if you want to find out more about BirdFriendly Maple, you can go to Audubon Vermont site, or you can also go to Audubon New York's website to our Forest Resource Center, where we've got more information on it there too. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in the upper Delaware River watersheds in New York, so specifically the upper and east branch Delaware watersheds that cover all of Delaware County, parts of Sullivan, Broome, Ulster, and Greene counties, we have our Harvest for Habitat projects. And that provides financial assistance to foresters and loggers working on forest management that improves habitat for wood thrush and cerulean warblers specifically, but of course there's associated bird species that also benefit from that work. And this is an area that we are providing really targeted education and technical assistance and trying to identify landowners and work with their foresters that have a harvest or harvest coming up within a 2 to 3 year period. So it's very targeted so that we can identify those projects that are ready to go. And then we work with the landowner, the forester, and the logger to make slight adjustments to stand level prescriptions to try to incorporate some of those bird-friendly practices. Okay, next slide, please. And then in New York and Pennsylvania, we're working in the Allegheny Highlands, which includes the Upper Allegheny and Cinemahoning watersheds, so shown on the map in light blue. And here we plan and implement landscape scale management that creates diverse forest habitat to benefit a number of forest birds like American woodcock, golden-winged warbler, prairie warbler, wood thrush, cerulean warbler, and black-throated blue warblers. And then the red line on the map is the Appalachian Mountains joint venture boundary, just in case you're curious what that's showing there. So on this project, we work with a variety of partners in New York and Pennsylvania. And a big part of this work, again, is outreach, education, and really targeted communication to key audiences. We're also creating new demonstration sites to not only benefit forest birds and achieve other management objectives like improved carbon storage and sequestration, but to also use for educational programming. Next slide, please. Which leads us to our demonstration sites. Audubon and our partners have many forest habitat demonstration sites in New York and other states. And this list here captures some of our demonstration sites. Each site showcases a variety of management applications and habitat conditions And then we also coordinate in-person programming at some of these locations and host landowner woods walks here as part of our education and engagement efforts. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. I'm sorry to cram a lot of information into a short amount of time, but I have my contact information here along with my colleague Zach Borman's contact information. He works with me on forest habitat management in New York State. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions you might have, and we'll be happy to follow up with you.
Great, thank you, Suzanne, so much. And I wanted, there's two things I wanted to mention before Suzanne started that I neglected to do, so I'm going to do it now before Tori begins. First one is, obviously, we would love to have questions for any of the presenters, any of the states that you're hearing from today. So go ahead and put those in right into the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. And the second thing is I'll put together kind of a full resource list that has all the contact info, websites and things that are being presented on today. And we'll share that out to everybody that's with us here in the next week or so. So don't feel like you need to be scribbling quickly to get all of this down. We'll get this back out to you so that you have it readily at your fingertips. So thank you again, Suzanne. And next up, we're gonna head down south to Connecticut, well, down south from where I am, and have Corey Folsom O'Keefe from Audubon, Connecticut, share about things happening there.
Great, thanks, Steve. So as Steve said, I'm the Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Connecticut, which fairly recently merged with Audubon, New York. So I get to work quite closely with Suzanne Traeger now, which is awesome. And, both Audubon, Connecticut and New York, we are using research, advocacy, policy, land management and education as ways to engage people about birds of conservation concern and directly impacting impacting those birds across our 2 states. Next slide. I wanted to start today by kind of saying, well, why should we care about managing woodlands for forest nesting birds in Connecticut? And then I want to sort of jump to, well, where in Connecticut is it important to think about managing woodlands for birds, and then kind of get into some of the how or the resources that are currently available for folks who are interested in doing that. So here you can see a map of the sort of United States, and what this map is telling you is that the Northeast is one of the regions in our country that supports some of the highest species diversities and densities of breeding birds in the continental United States. So the Northeast region is a pretty important place for forest nesting birds as well as other bird species. Next slide. And the Northeast is also the core breeding range for many woodland nesting birds. So, this is an example of wood thrush, and you can sort of just see a lot of wood thrush are found in New England, as are a variety of other bird species. But a lot of our woodland nesting bird species that are found in New England are suffering from declines. The wood thrush is declining at a rate of 1.9% per year. So, we have woodland nesting birds, right now, but they are facing some threats. And, if we want to ensure that they have a future in Connecticut and beyond, we need to be thinking about how we can manage our woodlands to benefit those species. Next slide. So in Connecticut, I think probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, we did an exercise to sort of recognize, where are our forest local areas. So these are areas that have a large area that are mostly forested, or at least 70 to 80 or more than 80% forested. And there also, a lot of them are areas where our important bird area technical committee actually reviewed these areas. And not only are they forest focal areas, but they're also recognized important bird areas. So, when we are thinking about where we should be managing woodlands for birds in mind, a lot of the times we're sort of referencing this map. We're sort of, looking for opportunities in these areas, those that are highlighted in blue or outlined in blue, but also those areas that are outlined in orange. And, one area I want to point out in particular, because I'll talk about it in a slide or two, is the area. So if we start on the far right-hand side, there's the really big one that cuts into Rhode Island. And then the next one over that's blue, that's sort of southeastern Connecticut. That's an area that we call the Lime Forest Block Important Bird Area. And I will talk about that in a slide. let's go on to the next slide. And, so those are the previous slides sort of showed the areas that we try to focus our forest management on. But I think regardless of where we're working, we have to recognize that work has to involve private landowners. This graphic basically shows that 85% of forests in Connecticut are owned by private landowners. So managing, woodlands for birds, it does really require us to be engaging with private landowners. We can't just engage with state landowners or fish and wildlife lands. We really need to be bringing private landowners into the mix. Next slide. And one way that we've done that is, there's a project that we did that just wrapped up this past spring, which was called the Lime Forest Block Conservation Project. And I wanted to just mention this project because I feel like it's a great model for an RCP. Basically this was a 3-year project. And in the first phase of the project, we offered something like 24 presentations, bird walks, workshops, and work days for landowners who lived in the Lime Forest Block Important Bird Area, which is a roughly 60,000 acre area. And we focused on getting those people out on walks, getting them familiar with the birds and the important bird area that they lived within, providing presentations over the winter months to get them excited about birds and bird conservation, and then invited them to workshops where they could actually learn how they could be better managers of their own land. And then eventually invited them to work days on local land trust properties, so they could get comfortable doing things like pulling invasive plant species or, creating, canopy gaps. We wanted them to sort of be able to get the experience so that they would be better land managers. And then for phase 2, we actually offered forest bird habitat assessments. And Suzanne talked about what these were a little bit in the last presentation, but I'll talk about it as well in a slide or two. But we offered habitat assessments to both private landowners within the Lime Forest Block, and then also to the local land trusts that were in the Lime Forest Block. And through that, we're able to impact about 2,000 acres, across the Lime Forest Block, and really help connect people too. So, the land trusts, we kind of connected them with the various private landowners that we did assessments for so that they could kind of work together on managing that area with birds in mind. Like I said, this was a pretty cool project because we really focused on sort of engaging the local community, getting knowledge to the landowners who actually lived in these areas, and then sort of culminating with offering habitat assessments and workshops after that to sort of make sure that they had the tools to really be good land managers. And I think this would be a great model in an RCP as well. Next slide. An opportunity that Audubon is currently involved with that is open to landowners right now. So I wanted to make sure to get the word out about it. And there is a deadline as well. So this is sort of an opportunity that is available now, but won't last for too much longer. And actually, I'm going to just drop the website into the chat. But there's a project called Accelerating the Pace of Woodland Conservation in the Southern New England Heritage Forest. And this is a project where Audubon is a partner on. There's quite a few partners that are involved in it, but the work is being supported by the Department of Agricultural Natural Resource Conservation Service. Next slide. And you can see the project area in the map on the right. This is sort of the northeast corner of Connecticut, a section of Rhode Island, and also a section of Massachusetts. And I think the folks from Mass Audubon will probably talk about this project too. But the goals are to improve forest habitat for fish, wildlife, and invertebrate species of concern, to support the recovery of an endangered or threatened species, and improve biodiversity, protect water quality and quantity, foster resilience and stand diversity, and enhance air quality and carbon sequestration. And the way we're going to go about doing that, next slide. And this is a 5-year project we are just finishing up year 4. So thus the sort of, if you want to get involved, now is the time because there's just 1 year left to the project. But how that's being done is the NRCS has the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, EQIP, that Suzanne mentioned, and also the Healthy Forest Reserve Program. And the project basically, NRCS is providing $1.5 million in funding for landowners to get forest management plans or stewardship plans, by a certified forester in in sort of that also come with a forest bird habitat assessment. It's a 2-for-1. And then once landowners have a forest management plan that's been approved by NRCS in place, then they can apply for forest conservation practice funding. And then also this project does have $4.6 million that's set aside for setting up conservation easements with private landowners. So it's a big project, and Audubon's really been involved in the sort of forest management, stewardship plans, and bird habitat assessments. So next slide. So what is a forest bird habitat assessment? You guys are probably going to hear this multiple times over this webinar today, but means an Audubon biologist and a certified forester walk a property. For this project, we're looking for properties that are more than 10 acres. And we walk the property with the landowner and point out, what birds are the property currently supports, why it supports those birds, and then what other actions a landowner might take to improve the property for birds. Next slide. And, Audubon will basically come up with sort of our recommendations, and we'll share those with the forester as he or she develops the forest management plan. We really want to make sure that the sort of bird recommendations are sort of, fit well with the sort of forester's recommendations to just sort of improve stand health and resiliency. And that will get kind of put together in an NRCS forage management or stewardship plan. And these are just some of the examples of different, management recommendations that Audubon might suggest to the forester to include, for the land to benefit, for the landowner that will benefit birds. So things like, keeping forest buffers along streams, retaining deadwood, maximizing forest interior, retaining early successional forest habitat. Those are some of the recommendations that would find their way into a forest bird habitat assessment report that would be incorporated into an NRCS forest management plan. And here's the pitch. This is basically, if you're interested in having this done on your property in Connecticut next year, the deadline is December 17th. So we're basically about 2 months away. And if you want to do it, the person to contact is Bill Reed, who is with the Last Green Valley. They're sort of the lead partner in Connecticut, and he could get you the application materials to be able to get one of these forest management plans with a bird habitat assessment incorporated into it. So that's kind of the really important information. If you want to do this, December 17th is the deadline. Next slide. And that's basically the end of my presentation. I am going to just quickly drop my contact information into the chat so that you have that. So if you are interested in learning more about the Last Green Valley Southern Heritage Forest program, or if you just want to hear maybe about the Lyme Forest Block Conservation Project or other projects that Audubon Connecticut has worked on in the past, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Corey. Just incredible how much work is going on, thus far in these two states, and also just noting the importance of partnerships in order to realize all that work, which I think we'll get as a continuing theme as we go through things here. So we're going to keep moving on. We're going to now head over to the Keystone State. Scott Parkhill, who is with Audubon MidAtlantic, will share on some of the offerings that are happening down there.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're excited to be here. I think we're kind of on the furthest edge of this region. Audubon MidAtlantic is a somewhat recent merger of Audubon Pennsylvania and Audubon Maryland. And so a lot of our programming is kind of down in the Mid-Atlantic region. But some of the forest types kind of transfer over, and it's exciting to see a lot of the work that other folks are doing around the Northeast. And so we just figured we'd have a brief overview of one of our programs in particular that is a lot of our landowner and forester outreach. Steve, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll be highlighting our partnership with the American Forest Foundation, specifically implementing their Family Forest Carbon Program. So this is a pretty cool program. It's one of Audubon's goals for the whole nation to focus more on climate solutions, carbon sequestration work, and that sort of thing. And recent report that came out found that eastern forests can really have a big effect as far as climate solutions. And so we've partnered with the American Forest Foundation to help implement the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is available currently in Pennsylvania and Maryland. I believe it's being rolled out in part of New York, and there are plans to bring it to the rest of New England. So definitely keep that on your radar as that gets rolled out. It's a program that's available for private landowners who have between 30 and 2,400 acres. And it's kind of an interesting program because underneath its umbrella, there are two different programs, growing the mature forest and enhancing the future forest. So it's compatible with mature forest management or with forests that are being regenerated with a regeneration harvest. And so Audubon is excited to jump in on this and use this as a great tool to accomplish forest bird management across the landscape. So if you'd like more information about this program, I encourage all of you to go to familyforestcarbon.org. They have a bunch of great information. And like I said, I believe that increasingly so, there are plans to roll it out up in New England. So Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. So as far as the areas that we're focusing on, the particular grant that I'm working on is focused in three NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation focal geographies, specifically the Upper Middle Allegheny Highlands, the Pennsylvania Wilds, and the Laurel Highlands. And so we do a little bit of work kind of all over the state, especially the Kittatinny Ridge, but our carbon sequestration work is really focused in these three priority areas. Next slide. And so some of the programming that we offer for landowners as part of this, we provide no-cost site visits where we will meet with landowners, discuss their interests for their property, so give them some information about the program and walk the property with them and discuss, what forest birds the property currently can support and potentially what opportunities there are for some of our priority species. And then following that, we do a general forest inventory. This is kind of a 10,000-foot overview of, what is on the property, focused primarily on the volume, because that's kind of how these carbon sequestration credits are really, the payments for this program are calculated, because there's kind of this trade-off between what is currently on the property and what is a good amount of money to encourage activities that are more geared towards carbon sequestration. And after this inventory, we'll discuss management recommendations with the landowner. And these can be regarding bird habitat. They can also be about general forest health issues. And some of them can be geared towards carbon sequestration practices that we'd like to see people implement. Something that is really great about this is that we're getting to interact with a lot of landowners, cover a lot of acres of ground, and even if landowners aren't really ready or the program isn't really right for them, we're still getting out there and we're able to interact with folks and get some good information to folks who are really interested in managing their property and doing what's best for the wildlife on their property. And if a landowner is interested in moving ahead, we provide assistance enrolling in the Family Forest Carbon Program. Next slide. And so we have some programming for foresters as well. So recently we've produced the Healthy Forests Guide, and that's a publication out of, it'll say Audubon, Pennsylvania, but it is for the whole Mid-Atlantic region. And that's a great resource. I know that a lot of these other groups have very similar guides that have come out, so I encourage everybody to look at all of those. As Suzanne Traeger mentioned before, there's a webinar training series going on right now that we're partnering with Audubon New York and Audubon Connecticut, which have merged on, and that's focusing on bird-friendly forestry, especially landscape to stand level management, best management practices, some available cost share programs. And what I'm really excited about is we're adding a carbon sequestration module onto that. And so as we go forward, we're really interested in adding to our carbon sequestration work and really focusing on getting people information about how can you manage your forests in a way that is cooperative with bird habitat management, carbon sequestration, and healthy forest management. And two things that I'll mention that are in development currently. We are working on a decision support tool that would help foresters kind of navigate their way through the Healthy Forest Guide especially with a mind for carbon sequestration. And so that kind of takes a property and helps folks walk through landscape context and other factors that go into management decisions. So that's going to be a really exciting interactive tool, potentially a website or an app. So that'll be, look for that to be rolled out the next year or two. And then just touch briefly on, there's a potential that we're going to be working with some sort of bird-friendly pulp program. A lot of our forests here in Pennsylvania need a lot of low-grade material cut. And just because of economic constraints, a lot of folks are not really in a position where they can make it financially viable to remove this low-grade material. So we're working with local mills to try to figure out if there's a way that we can encourage, connect landowners who need some of this low-grade material to be thinned as part of wildlife habitat management programs, and see if we can connect them with mills and try to get a win for birds, a win for healthy forests, and a win for so these communities which really rely on forest products. So that'll be kind of some exciting work coming here in the future. And if you want to hop on to the next slide. And so just kind of to think about the two major species and habitats we're focusing at with this program, pardon me. The Family Forest Carbon Program has these two programs under its umbrella. One, growing the mature forest, which focuses a little bit on maintaining mature forest structure and really sequestering carbon in these stands, which are about 80 or more years. And the other is preparing stands for regeneration harvests. So in order to sequester as much carbon as possible, it's kind of nice that you can go into these, there's solutions for forests at every age. And so, on the younger side of things, this program frees up funding for landowners to spray invasive species and remove competing vegetation. Pardon me. And these funds really help to make an overstory removal successful. A lot of what we run into here in the Mid-Atlantic are issues with invasive species or high deer browse. And you can do a regeneration harvest, and it may or may not be successful depending on how much competing vegetation you have. And so this program will free up funding to control that vegetation. And then kind of our poster child for this here in the Mid-Atlantic is the golden wing warbler, which is we're really fortunate here to have golden wing warblers. And so that's kind of our poster child that we raise up for landowners. And on the more mature side of things, we focus more at wood thrush. I mean, that's I'm a little bit partial. That's what I did my master's on just recently at Penn State. But that's a great program. Landowners receive payments in exchange for not removing more than 25% of the basal area over a 20-year contract. And even within that contract, we try to use that 25% in some situations to increase vertical structural diversity for wood thrush. And some of in the center here, these are the three major things that we try to bring up when we help landowners decide which direction of the spectrum they want to go in with this program, taking into account the landscape context, as well as what is the state of the forest, and also what are the objectives of landowner. And one of the great things I really see in carbon programs is there are a lot of woodland owners who view forests as being mature systems. And there is a big need, especially here in the Mid-Atlantic, for early successional forests. But mature forest management has been difficult to do because it really doesn't pay for itself. A lot of times heavy cuts can help to offset the cost of management, but some of this more mature forest management can actually be funded now with this money that comes from carbon programs. So that's kind of the direction that we're going with this. So can we go to the next slide? And with that, I'll pass it on to the other folks. I think some of the contact information might have been clipped at the very bottom there, but feel free to reach out and ask if you have any more questions. There's a lot of interesting work coming up too in the region. So thank you much.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. And yeah, it is your email is cut off a little bit there. But again, as I mentioned, we'll send out a full resource list so that everybody has the contact info that they need. Also encourage folks again to go ahead and throw those questions that you may have for our various presenters right into the chat, and we will get to those in here just a little bit. But we're going to travel from Pennsylvania. We're going to head east and go to Massachusetts and hear from Jeff Ritterson about the offerings at Mass Audubon.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks to Katie and Sarah for organizing a great webinar series. And appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about what's happening in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So back in 2014 or so, before I was at Mass Audubon, we partnered with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation and the Mass Woodlands Institute, and worked directly with Audubon Vermont to adapt their Foresters for the Birds program to Massachusetts. And the program began as more of a pilot in the northwest corner of the state, but being a relatively small state, we did expand statewide. And we started in that northwest corner with our own version of the Birders Dozen, so species that are relatively easy to identify by sound or sight, are of conservation concern, and represent a range of forest habitat types and conditions. But with the statewide expansion, we realized those 12 species wouldn't quite work in all parts of the state. Next slide, please. And the reason being that there are 3 broad ecoregions in Massachusetts, with some differences in elevation and forest types and the resulting bird communities. There's also some differences in forest fragmentation levels and patterns of land use, all of which can be important when conducting a forest bird habitat assessment. So with that in mind, next slide, please. We ended up with 17 of what we call focal bird species. And there's a lot of overlap between, in species among the 3 regions, here shown as the southeast, central, and western parts of the state. But each region only has about 12 or 13 birds associated with it in this program. There are some regional specialties, or what I like to call the gold medal birds. So for example, if you're up high about, above 1,000 feet or so in the western part of the state, you have a pretty unique opportunity to manage for mourning warbler, which is the bird shown at the top photo here. Whereas if you're in the southeast, a regional specialty would be the northern bobwhite. But overall, the selection of species is meant, again, to represent a variety of conditions within the mature forest habitat, a selection of young forest birds that rely on more of a mosaic of forest ages, even with some agricultural areas mixed in, and then some cavity nesters as well. Next slide, please. So the Massachusetts program is a little bit different than what we've heard so far, in that we rely almost entirely on our private consulting foresters to work with clients to do both write a habitat management plan, but do that initial forest bird habitat assessment as well. That's then, those habitat considerations are incorporated into the resulting management plan. In order to do so, the foresters go through a pretty rigorous training process. The first part of which is a day-long group training where they receive a presentation on the basic habitat principles for forest birds, followed by a trip to a field site to discuss concepts like data collection, and to see some habitat management in action. And we've recently began doing some of these workshops again, but with the indoor portion on Zoom. And we've also started welcoming other land managers and conservation professionals. So if any of those folks are on today and are interested, definitely reach out to me, and we can get something pulled together. The second part of the foresters training would be to go ahead and line up a client and schedule a one-on-one field visit with me, where I meet them out at the property. We review the concepts, we bounce some ideas around with specific management ideas for that property. they then go ahead and write the forest management plan and send it to me to be reviewed. And I'll make suggestions for any changes. But at this point, they're becoming pretty competent. And then a final step would be for the forester to go ahead and do this one more time on their own and send that plan for me to review one more time. At this point, they're doing great and they are considered fully trained in the program, but I'm always available to them to answer any questions or even provide additional field time or training as needed. Next slide, please. And then to generate clients for the consulting foresters, we also do, much like the other states, outreach to landowners, delivering information such as the conservation status of our forest bird species, their habitat needs, management practices, much of what was covered during earlier parts of this webinar series. And events can be indoors or nowadays on Zoom or outdoors at a forested property, some combination of the two. I've done evening events, weekend events, all sorts of things. We almost always try to include a landowner and their forester to add their perspectives to the conversation as well. So, this is still going on. It slowed down a bit during COVID and as a relatively new dad, but we're ready to get back in the saddle. So if folks are interested, various RCPs or landowners in general, definitely let me know. Next slide, please. And so the program, then goes ahead and matches the trained foresters up with interested landowners. And it really has taken off over the past 6 years in Massachusetts, with over 300 plans now, reaching about 40,000 acres. Most of that occurring on private family forests, but also on municipal forest and land trust properties. But much like the other states, 75% of our forest is in family private ownerships, and conducting management on those lands will be important to really scaling up our conservation efforts. So if you are interested and you're a landowner or a land trust, next slide, please. Here's a list of some good resources. If at any point along the process, feel free to reach out to me if you're confused or don't know where to find a piece of information. I can definitely point you in the right direction. Your DCR service forester is another great resource. There's one assigned to each region of the state, and for no charge, I can come out, walk the property with you, talk about your various forest management goals and different options for programs or funding, and just generally be an independent third-party opinion of sorts. The Foresters for the Birds program is in Massachusetts is housed under DCR's Working Forest Initiative, and that website can provide you with all sorts of information, including a list of consulting foresters who are trained in the program that you can reach out to and work with. You can also find out information on how to apply for cost share funding to help a consulting forester do that habitat assessment and write the management plan. And it really is a significant chunk of funding that can cover 75%, even upwards of 100% of your expenses. So definitely look into that, or ask whatever consulting forester you choose to work with about that. And finally, I'll point out MassWood's website, which is run by the UMass Amherst Extension Service. Also great information there, including a place where you can enter your town, and then it'll generate a list of, for example, local land trusts. It'll tell you the name of your DCR service forester, and a list of consulting foresters that are working in your area. Next slide, please. So I'll just, Corey discussed this a bunch with respect to Connecticut, but I'll quickly mention the Southern New England Heritage Forest RCPP. So each state sort of tailors the mechanics of this program to align with their various state forest bird conservation initiatives. So in Massachusetts, there is still funding available if you're in the Massachusetts area of the map or one of the towns listed on the left there, there's still funding available for you to work with the forester to, again, get that habitat assessment and forest management plan, and a little bit of funding through the EQIP program that folks have mentioned, to go ahead and then implement whatever management practices are written into that plan. And even if that money runs out, you still end up with an NRCS approved plan that would set you up for implementation funding through the regular state programs, just not, you know, outside of this pool of money that's concentrated in this geographic area. And next slide, just one more thing that, you know, that Suzanne mentioned, and I'm sure Steve will talk about, but Mass Audubon is, you know, following the lead of Audubon Vermont, Steve's great work becoming a state partner in their BirdFriendly Maple program. So again, you know, maple producers will agree, instead of managing as a monocultural maple trees with very little habitat structure, again, those layers of vegetation in the understory and midstory, for example, they'll agree to diversify their canopy tree species, all around manage for better forest bird habitat, and they'll do so by getting a forest management plan to be recognized as producing bird-friendly syrup and receive this logo sticker placed on their jugs. So should be rolling out in Massachusetts this year. The Massachusetts Mass Audubon website is not live yet, but should be in the next few days. So definitely stay tuned. Next time you're out looking for maple syrup, look for this logo. And of course, check out the Audubon Vermont website for a bunch of great information as well. Next slide. Yep, that's all I got for you. My contact information is there. Once again, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. Really great stuff going on, and I really, you know, like everybody is kind of seeing the repetition in some of the themes of the different programs that are now throughout the Northeast here, and really a testament to the fact that landowners, land managers, other resource professionals are really keying in on this, and we're really now creating this network of forested landscapes that are very intentionally being managed with birds in mind, which is really one of our main goals through all of this work. So our tour is almost complete. We're going to head up north now to the great state of Maine, and Sally Stockwell from Maine Audubon is going to share the programs that are going up there. And then after Sally's finished, we'll head back down to Vermont. We will wrap things up. So Sally, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody else who's on the call this afternoon. I'm happy to talk about what's happening in Maine. I'm going to shift gears a little bit from what other folks have talked about so far and build a little bit more on what Carrie mentioned in regards to the importance of this area for birds, and then switch into some of the work we've been doing. So next slide, please. Just as background, something you may not realize about Maine is that if you look at the state of Maine, we have as much ecological diversity from the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state as 20 degrees of latitude in Europe. So we have a lot of diversity within a relatively small area. We also have a relatively small human footprint. You can see the light green areas up in the upper right-hand side of the page there, and where there's relatively little human intrusion. And we have some major habitat corridors going from Vermont, New Hampshire into Maine, and then up into Quebec and the New Brunswick. And we also, if you look at Maine from outer space, you can see that it's a pretty kind of a dark hole compared to most of the rest of the eastern seaboard. So we have really a wonderful opportunity and a responsibility to take care of what we have left here. So next, please. And this is a map that was put together by National Audubon a number of years ago. It may look a little bit different today if we were to create it, but it's basically a map of the last biggest blocks of forest habitat all along the eastern seaboard. And what jumps out, all of that green, dark green blob in the upper right-hand corner, that's Maine. So we have over 17 million acres of forest in the state. We are the most heavily forested state in the nation. And we have a lot of variety in the state. Next, please. Because of the significance of Maine to contributing to the breeding bird populations, the Western Maine Mountains area has been designated as a globally significant important bird area, which means that there are just lots of birds that come back here every year to breed. And we have over 90 species of birds that breed in our forests. And we'd like to think of it as our baby bird factory. Next, please. So when we developed our Forestry for Maine Birds program, which like Massachusetts, we built off of Vermont's program starting back in 2013, we really were thinking about who can we collaborate with, what is our emphasis going to be, and we've developed a very robust collaboration between Maine Audubon, the Maine Forest Service, Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and the Forest Stewards Guild. Next. And we service, like other states, we service and work very closely with foresters, landowners, and loggers. And so we have done trainings that include both presentations and workshops, field workshops for foresters, for landowners, for loggers. And but our primary emphasis has really been on training the professionals to work with landowners, and rather than have us go out and do active habitat assessments ourselves. And so Maine Audubon, unlike some of the other states, has not sent anybody out to do the assessments ourselves. We work with foresters, we connect the foresters with the landowners and the loggers, and it's been a very successful model. We work with both consulting foresters and also state district foresters. So next, please. And really, one of the things that we like to convey to all of the folks that we work with is how we have these different types of forests in the state. And then within each of those different types of forest, you have different species that are using different habitat features within the forest. And this is, for most people, quite a shock. I mean, I've had foresters say to me, wow, I had no idea there were that many different species that use that many different places in the forest. And so it's been very eye-opening for them. And we also talk a lot about the migratory pathways and how these birds are moving back and forth between Maine and other parts of this continent and other continents. Next, please. A little bit like Massachusetts, we expanded on the dozen species from Vermont, and we have 20 what we call priority bird species. And we always talk about them as being representative of other species that use similar forest types and habitat features. So we have 4 major forest types and then 8 habitat features that we're really cued into and that we try to get other people to cue into. Next, please. So I'm going to quickly run through just, we have the northern softwood priority birds. This is bordering on boreal forest species that are up there in northern Maine. Next. We have our northern mixed wood species, which covers quite a bit of the state. And you'll notice that within each group of species that are priority species tied with a habitat type, we have usually a species that it likes pretty closed canopy, high up in the trees, something that maybe likes to be down closer to the ground, a cavity nesting bird, and something that likes that mid-story. Next, please. Here's our priority species for the northern hardwood forests, and also includes, we usually have some sort of flycatcher in each group because we like to think about the importance of gaps and how those gaps are used by flycatchers. Next, please. And then we also have our oak pine priority species. So we have these 4 different forest types that are spread across the state. And depending on who we're working with, we're focusing on a little bit different species, but the habitat needs often overlap between the different types of forest, but the particular strategies for managing those forests might be different. Next, please. So we put together, like the other states, we put together a series of guides. We started with our Forester's Guide, which is the one on the right in the spiral bound, which has a lot of very detailed technical information in it, although it's in a very approachable way, presented in a very approachable way. We then expanded to do a Woodland Owner's Guide, which is kind of a condensation of the key points that are in the Forester's Guide. And then we went one step further and we created a guide for loggers. And the logging community has been super receptive to this. In fact, there's 2 major professional logging groups in Maine, and one of which just this past spring said, hey, do you have any more of those brochures? They're very popular with our members. And so we had to reprint them and send another 500 copies out to those folks. In Maine, sometimes harvesting happens just with a logger and without a forester. So we felt that that was a really important audience to connect with. And although we always encourage landowners to work with with foresters, it doesn't always happen. So that's an important audience for us. And then we also have these fun trading cards that the American Forest Foundation helped us create. That is a little ring of the 20 different species, their habitat needs, and the 4 different forest types. Next, please. Our primary goal, which is a little bit different than some of the other states, is really around creating more mature, uneven aged forest stands. And the reason for this is because pre-settlement times, about 85% of the state was covered by these more mature, uneven aged forest stands. But today, that percentage is down closer to 2 to 4%. So we're really encouraging more structural diversity, more age diversity, more species diversity, which ultimately means more wildlife diversity. And one of our challenges, I think, in Maine is that we don't really have very many good examples of these older forest stands. So we have to kind of create the image in people's minds of what that could look like. Next, please. So one of the things we do, and this was something that Steve taught us, was we work with folks on training them to do a quick forest bird habitat assessment, using their hands, each finger representing a different habitat feature in the forest that they want to be looking out for. And this has proved to be super, super valuable, not just for the landowners, but for the professional foresters. They all love this. And then in addition to doing what our state landowner outreach forester calls a handy habitat assessment, we do have more technical forms with percentages and everything that folks can fill out. But this is just a great way for folks to access the information. Next, please. And then in our guides, we have a little bit these wonderful graphics that were created around what are the features that each different species needs. In this case, for scarlet tanager, they like an overstory that's medium high density. They tend to sing and nest in the very high. Over on the right-hand side, you see they tend to sing and nest in the high oak trees. Next, please. Contrast that with a Canada warbler that likes to be down on the ground, near water, and in thickets near water. Next, please. And then contrast that with an olive-sided flycatcher that likes to have these little gaps in the canopy opening where they can fly out and catch their insects. Next, please. So we take all that information, we've shared it with landowners, as I said, landowners, foresters, loggers, and we work statewide doing these outreach presentations and workshops. But over the last 5 years or so, we have focused in 2 areas of the state. One is in Western Maine, that little pink area there on the border with Quebec and New Hampshire. And we, like some of the other states, we had a grant through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, through their RCPP program, to work with landowners on creating wildlife friendly management plans, and then also habitat enhancement plans through the, with another partner, the New England Forest Foundation. And so that was one of the first RCPP grants that was issued. We had our challenges working with getting all the details straightened out, but it proved to be a pretty successful endeavor and is still ongoing now. And then we also worked in the Lower Kennebec River watershed, which is the area on the right there, that where we provided financial incentives for landowners upfront before they actually wrote their management plans, because we wanted to give people an incentive to take that next step. I will say that wasn't quite as successful as we had hoped, but we did learn some lessons through that. And I don't expect you to read what's on there on the right-hand side, but we do have a specific list of elements that need to be built into those wildlife friendly management plans. And we created a template that includes reference to each of those different issues for foresters to use when they write their management plans. So rather than doing a separate habitat assessment and then giving that to the forester, we just have the foresters build in the wildlife friendly pieces into their management plans. And like other states, funding is still available, even though these two projects, the funding has expired for those two projects. Funding is still available through the NRCS EQIP program for drafting these wildlife friendly management plans. The state of Maine has a similar program to help landowners draft wildlife friendly management plans. Both of those agencies also provide some funding to implement those management plans. And so there is funding available out there. Next, please. We also have created a number of demonstration forests across the state, and we created a series of signs to go out in these demonstration forests that draw attention to one of the 8 different habitat features that are important. So here at the Yankee woodlot, you can see examples of where the gap opening, 3 layers of vegetation, and snags. And these have been quite popular. We have done these demonstration forests in collaboration with various land trusts and the Soil and Water Conservation District. In this case, that's the Somerset Soil and Water Conservation District that manages this property. And they've been great partners to work with. They like to host trainings and get out in the field. This past spring, we did a training at the Yankee woodlot for all of the procurement foresters that work for the Sappi mill. And they were really excited about that. The guy who leads the team there said to me afterwards, this was really great. I think my folks really liked it. And I'd like to do this every couple of years. And so we're making headway in terms of working with a variety of audiences, even within the forestry community. So in addition to the private consultants, we've got these consultants that are the paid professionals that are working for either the mills or large private owners. And we also are working very closely with the district foresters. So rather than us going out and doing a walk and talk with folks, we have the district foresters. We connect landowners with the district foresters and then also connect landowners with foresters that have been through our Forestry for Maine Birds training. So they know they're getting somebody who has that information that they'd like to integrate into their plans. Next, please. So coming soon, we're going to be we are in the process of developing a companion program, Forests for Fish, which we first learned about a number of years ago at a conference that was the state of Michigan has been doing this program. And in Maine, our forests and our waters are so connected. And we have the last stronghold of both brook trout and Atlantic salmon in the state, and all these other great vernal pools and turtles, wood turtles and others that are here, that we really want to make that connection stronger. Although thinking about the importance of riparian areas or those areas alongside waterways is already integrated into our Forestry for the Maine Birds program, as is carbon sequestration and carbon storage and resiliency for climate change. But we really wanted to draw special attention to this connection. So we're creating a couple of new guides, one that's going to be geared for foresters, forest landowners and loggers, and another one that's going to be geared for homeowners that live along lakes or rivers that don't have a lot of land to manage, but they can make a big difference in terms of protecting water quality and habitat. Next, please. And like others have said, we're also working with Steve to bring bird-friendly maple to Maine. And that's going to happen over the next year or so. Next, please. So here's a list of contact information for myself at Maine Audubon, but then there's a brand new landowner outreach forester with the Maine Forest Service, Jack Hernandez, who is going to be great to work with. Joe Roy is a landowner outreach specialist with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and he has been super excited about this program and is helping to promote it anytime he meets and talks with landowners. Amanda Mahaffey is with the Forest Stewards Guild, and they've been a integral partner. So every time we do our presentations and workshops, we do them in partnership with at least one of these other people. So we have a wildlife biologist and a forester at every presentation, every workshop, every time we're meeting or talking to somebody. So I think that wraps it up for me. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sally, so much. Really incredible. Again, I'm kind of overwhelmed by how much is happening throughout the region here. And we're going to go into Vermont now, and I'm going to kind of go quickly through this because a lot of the things that I would be talking about, my colleagues in these other states have already addressed. So I'm just going to let you know what those are, and I'm not going to go into much any detail on about them, but certainly welcome folks to reach out at any time with specific questions. So as we kind of roll out National Audubon's Healthy Forest Program in Vermont, one of the things that we focus on through a lot of our landowner work directly is as Suzanne has mentioned, the Woods, Wildlife, and Warblers program. And here in Vermont, that's a partnership primarily with the Vermont Woodlands Association, and we also partner with the American Forest Foundation. Of course, then it has expanded to work with our friends in New York State. So we do collaborate with them on things as well. But this is the program under which a lot of our habitat assessments with private landowners take place. In addition to the assessments themselves, where we go out and walk the land, we'll even take, if someone says, I have a forest management plan, I'm working with a forester, but I kind of want to know if it really is doing all it can be doing to really be intentionally thinking about habitat. So we'll often review those forest management plans and give folks some suggestions, or even directly reach out to their forester and provide recommendations on how they could really kind of beef up the bird aspects of those plans. We also occasionally go out into the woods when there's implementation of those plans happening. So as a forester may be marking a stand for an upcoming harvest, we've been invited to go and participate in that process so that we're looking at specific habitat attributes that we want to make sure that we're either enhancing or maintaining as that marking is taking place before the harvesting happens. As has been mentioned in other states, we do have a network of demonstration sites. Most of these are they're all on either privately owned lands that are publicly accessible, or they're on public lands. And the whole idea there is that for many landowners who are not familiar with active forest management and harvesting, it can be somewhat of a nerve-wracking experience to think about doing that on their own land. So these demonstration sites provide an opportunity to go and see work that has been done X number of years ago. And it was specifically done in these cases with one of the primary objectives being bird habitat. And then we continue to do our landowner workshops and presentations. Most of those have been virtual, as has been with everybody, but we are starting to get back in person with those as well. Our Foresters for the Birds program is we kind of see that as somewhat of a separate thing. That's working directly with our consulting foresters, state lands foresters, county foresters, federal foresters that work on federal lands here in Vermont, to really help to work together, to collaborate on how we can think collectively. We can learn from them, they can learn from us about how we can incorporate birds into management of our forest lands. Suzanne mentioned the forester endorsement program that we're currently working on in collaboration with Audubon New York and Audubon Connecticut. And then the forester toolkit, which you see here in the bottom left, which were some of the publications, and you've seen these, how other states have presented them, but these are really designed for a forester, professional forester audience, that they can slip them into their vest pocket. And when they're out walking the land, working with landowners, they can pull them out and really talk about how the work that they're going to be prescribing is going to be a tool for enhancing habitat for particular species. So those are some products that we've been had available for about a decade now, and have been very popular with foresters in communicating with private landowners. BirdFriendly Maple I won't go into at all, just other than to say that we're currently up around 65 participating maple producers in the state, and that number continues to grow annually as more and more maple syrup producers are interested in doing what they can to help consider birds and management, and to use it as a kind of a market-based conservation approach to all of our efforts. I did want to mention, though, we've heard about some of the cost share programs with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We worked with NRCS here in Vermont, probably 7, 8 years ago now, to really think about how could some of the practices that they provide funding to implement could really be done to enhance habitat, thinking more primarily about some of those mature forest nesting species. So our wood thrush, our black-throated blue warbler, and our scarlet tanagers. And so we took some of the silvicultural prescriptions from our Foresters for the Birds toolkit, managing silviculture with birds in mind. And these are some of the same silvicultural options that Nancy and I presented on 2 weeks ago. These are more kind of along the lines of ecological forestry. So crop tree release with canopy gap formation, variable density thinning, group selection, and the expanding gap irregular shelter wood are all eligible practices through these, what are being defined as the timber songbird practices, that a landowner can apply for funding for through NRCS here in Vermont. And I do believe that they may also be applicable in other states as well. I tried to get a confirmation from our NRCS forester, and that was his understanding as well. So if you are in another state and you're interested in this kind of cost share funding from NRCS, certainly worth reaching out to your local NRCS office to see what they can help you out with. And the last thing I really want to just highlight, which is somewhat different from some of the other state programs that are going on. We have recently partnered with a group called the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. And this is a program that traditionally has been involved in getting young adults opportunities to do trail work primarily. And they spend a full summer, or they had spring crews and fall crews where they would get out on the land and do a lot of really important work in our public lands, our state parks in particular, on trail work. And more recently, the VYCC has developed a forestry program to give young adults who are interested in considering a career in forestry, whether that's being as a forester or even being a logger or an operator of some sort of equipment, give them some professional experience on the ground so that they can see what that's all about. So they've developed a crew. Just last year, they started this program, and we're working in partnership with them to bring kind of an ecological thinking to that program, so that the young adults, as they're learning the hard skills of forest management, are also understanding the whys. Why are we doing this? Why are the trees that are marked the way they are marked in that way? And how can that enhance habitat for birds and other wildlife along the way? One of the really important needs that we've identified as well is that in some of our smaller privately owned parcels that have maybe really low grade, low quality wood, that a commercial harvest would be hard to implement. Therefore, it may be hard to get an operator, a logger, to come on site, to bring their equipment on site in order to do that work. This is a place where we're trying to make connections between those landowners and the services that the VYCC forestry crews can offer. So TSI, the timber stand improvement sorts of activities, many of which fit very well with the same practices I showed in the previous slide on ecological forestry. Here's a photo of one of the young women who was part of last fall's crew, and they were doing a timber stand improvement in a somewhat young sugar maple stand that had very low structural complexity. It was kind of all even aged, and this work is designed to enhance the stems that they've left, as well as thinking about enhancing structure in the future. So for anybody that's from Vermont on the presentation today, and if you're interested in seeing if there's a need or a way to connect with landowners you work with, or if you are a landowner, and you'd like to consider maybe getting a VYCC crew to come out and do that work, it is not for free. There is obviously a cost associated with that. Sometimes those NRCS funds can help with that. But definitely reach out to me. It's a growing program. It shows a lot of promise, and we're looking for other opportunities to engage these young people in work on the ground. And I wanted to finish up, since we did not have a presenter from Rhode Island, I wanted to acknowledge that Rhode Island has actually engaged in this work as well. And Forestry for Rhode Island Birds is a program that came out of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership and some of the other folks that they work with. And right now, this is taken from their website for their program, which is listed at the bottom there. They do have a Forestry for Rhode Island Birds guide, as you can see here. They have a number of different demonstration sites where they've been implementing silviculture with birds in mind, and they offer workshops for landowners and forestry professionals as well. And so if you are from Rhode Island and you're interested in seeing how you can get engaged in the programs that are being offered there, definitely check out this website, and they're doing some exciting things in Rhode Island as well. And that brings us to that. I know we are kind of tight on time, and we said we're going to go to 3:30, which we're at now. So to kind of wrap things up, and I will stay on certainly to entertain questions that folks have. But if you do need to leave, just wanted to make sure that folks are reminded, if you're a forester looking for SAF credits for either SAF certification or a state licensing requirement, make sure that you do sign in the Google attendance sheet, which I believe was dropped into the chat box, although I'm not 100% sure of that without looking there. If it's not there and you're still looking for that, just email me, steve.hagenbu@audubon.org, as you see here, and we'll make sure that we get you on the list for acknowledgement of those credits. Any other questions on any of the programs today or from the past three? Also, please, I welcome folks to reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation on the phone with you. I can share my phone number or through my email if you want to reach out that way first. And also then just to remind folks, if you're interested in the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, please be in touch with Katie or Sarah, and we'd be more than happy to help you out. So from kind of the formal side of the program, we're going to wrap things up there. Thank you again so much for everybody for joining us here on a nice fall day, and appreciate all of your interest and support in thinking about managing our forests with birds in mind. And special thank you as well to all the presenters who took the time to pull together some information to present and share with all of you as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop the screen share, and we'll jump into the chat and see what kind of questions we have. Okay. See, Katie is here as well, but let me just see where we're at. Questions.
I think some were answered directly. I know there was a question.
So here looks like a question from Mark. And this would be a question for Corey, who I believe is still with us. So Corey, could the forest bird habitat assessment occur outside of Connecticut, i.e. westerly Rhode Island? Oh, okay. We are contiguous to some Connecticut forests, of course, of focus that were mentioned. So again, I'm gonna let Corey see if that's a potential through the Audubon Connecticut program. But if not, Mark, hopefully the information, the website I shared there for Rhode Island might be another avenue.
Yeah, I shared the link for the Southern New England Heritage Forest project. And if you go on there and scroll down, it has the contact name for the person in Rhode Island. And I
Awesome.
suggested that Mark reach out to that person to find out specifically, is westerly included in the focus area? I don't know that 100% myself, but that person who's listed as the contact would be able to know. And if it is, would be able to get him the appropriate application materials.
Great, thank you. If I just scroll down a little bit more, I would have seen your response. So thank you for following up on that.
Thank you, guys.
And then a note from Phil Brown, New Hampshire Audubon. Thanks, Phil, for your note here on this. That New Hampshire Audubon has been managing their sanctuaries with birds in mind. And just kind of scrolling down here. Funding and capacity have been the challenges, as they always are, with getting these things rolling out. But I know we all look forward to the hopefully the near future when New Hampshire Audubon is able to be offer some services out there to landowners and land managers as well. So thanks for that. Karen likes the forest for fish, Sally, which is a very cool idea. Thank you. Question from Mary for Sally here. Informational graphics prepared for the Maine forest. Really appreciating that and thinking they're outstanding. Can those be shared as templates, those images? And I'm gonna, I think maybe that's kind of the diagram that shows the structure in the forest and the different bird species that align with it that you mentioned, Sally, that a lot of foresters are keying in on. Mary, I'll let you, if you want to come off mute, if that's not the graphic, maybe you can clarify with Sally what it is that you're like. Oh, and here's Sally communicating. I should just keep reading before I go into a long discussion of these things. Oh, I see you, Mary, but can't hear you.
So all the graphics, like the graphics that show different birds and where they are in the forest, those are all very useful. And I think across New England, and even though the text might change. And yeah, I just wonder, there's sounds like there's a lot going on with sharing of forestry techniques and certification, learning about that. But is there a strategy for sharing some of these graphics? Because, I must admit I work in an urban area, and the challenge is really, sharing messaging about the value of forests, even though they're very small forests. And one extra question is, in urban areas, we're particularly interested in the riparian corridor because it really is the last landscape. They're because they're volatile floodplains, they're not really developed, but sometimes they're not necessarily parks or conserved or protected land, but there's usually a lot of forests along it. So even though this is again a more urban, high density suburban question, is there a graphic that shows that riparian zone and the birds around that, the forests along the riparian zone?
Can I answer, Mary? Two things. So I will check. We would love to see other people use the graphics that we've developed if they can be helpful. I just need to check with our communications folks to see where we stand in terms of artist rights. I just can't remember what our arrangement was around that. I think we probably own the rights, and in which case we're happy to share any of those materials. Secondly, in terms of riparian areas, that's what our Forest for Fish thing is all about, is focusing on those riparian areas. And although we're not zeroing in on the birds per se that use those areas, we're zeroing in on why those are important for fish and other wildlife. So, and we've got some great graphics coming with that as well. And so once that, I could even send you the drafts if you want, or you can wait till we finished it up and I can send you those.
Well, we kind of started drafts down here too, to try to describe that, because in these areas, everybody wants to put a bicycle trail. And so it's how to message what is going on in those riparian zones that are volatile and changing, but also habitat. Yeah, so we have some draft imagery that we could share with you. It would be interesting to have a conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So how do I think I took a screenshot of your.
Yeah, just email me at stockwell@maineaudubon.org and then we can follow up from there. And Mary, who are you with?
I'm a Park Watershed in Hartford, Connecticut. It's a small profit. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Great. And it looks like we have a question here for you, Scott, in PA, Audubon MidAtlantic. Where are the funds coming from to pay landowners in PA to cut no more than 25% basal area over 25 years? And what is the mechanism for ensuring that they follow through on that?
That's a really good question. And this is why I think, carbon credit markets are such an interesting, I guess, frontier would be a way of putting it. So this program currently is funded by grants from or donations really from companies to get off the ground. So right now, the contracts that are being sold are supported by those large grants that are coming from companies. I think the largest donor is Amazon. But the idea is that AFF is partnering with a company called Vera, and they will be going out as a third party and monitoring plots on these landowners' properties and comparing them with some other plots. And they are able to verify that there actually is carbon capture occurring in these forests, which are managed differently than they would be otherwise. And once that's verified, then I know that AFF is going to try to sell them on national carbon markets. So it's in its early stages right now, but I know that they are right on the edge, kind of initiating the process of actually taking credits that are being, I guess, sequestered on these landowners' properties and then turning around and then selling them on these carbon exchanges, which is a really interesting process. And so the goal is to make it kind of self-sustaining. But I know right now at the moment it is being supported by some donations, some pretty large donations from some companies.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up, which is
Yeah.
that you said they would only be paid if they're not cutting, if they're cutting less than 25% of basal area, I think you said.
Yeah.
But is there a minimum basal area that they have to still retain?
So there is, in order to be enrolled in the program, there's a minimum board footage. So you need at least 2,000 board feet per acre. And so that's kind of how the program.
Before or after harvesting?
Prior to enrollment. Yeah. So there's it's a little, yeah. So there's that mature forest program, which is that 25% of the basal area. And that you need 2,000 board feet per acre in order to get into that program. But then the flip side of it, that early successional program, all that is required for that is you have to have, I believe that it's over 30% coverage of competing vegetation. And that program can occur within 10 years of a overstory release. So basically, they're looking at the amount of competing vegetation. And if it's particularly high, you receive funding to treat that, and then you cut. So there's kind of those two different programs within that, if that makes sense. One is more kind of geared towards mature forest management, and one is geared a little bit more towards the early side of things. Oh, Steve, I think you're still muted there, but.
Yeah, you're right. I am. Just thanking Sally for the question. It's a good one, and Scott for the follow-up on that. So it looks like we've actually gotten through. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So unless anyone else would like to offer a question or a comment, looks like we can wrap things up. Katie, any last words from you?
No, just thank you for attending, and for those who have been with us for the 4 webinars or for more than one. Yeah, definitely appreciate you participating, and thank you to all the speakers. Such a wonderful slide deck of resources. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your fall, and hopefully we'll see you out in the woods someday. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.